Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us. My name is Katie Earle. I'm the coordinator of the University Express program, and I work for the Erie County Department of Senior Services. And we're here virtually with Joe Fiegl today, and super excited for his presentation. I know I am, and I'm sure all of you are too. Before we jump into that, though, we do have some new folks, so I'm going to quickly go through my normal spiel here. We are recording the session, and I'll try to post it on our website as soon as I can if all goes as planned. And for those of you, if you are new, you have joined without your video showing and you're muted. It's not because you've done anything wrong. It's just the settings for our program here today. And you also might think you're the only one here in attendance, but I promise you there are other people. It's just that we're in anonymous participation mode. So only Joe and I can see the complete list of everybody who's here today. So as Joe goes through his presentation and you have any questions or comments, you can type those in the Q&A panel right away, and we'll try to get to as many things as can at the end of the presentation and that we have time for. So if you're new, you'll access your Q&A panel on likely the right-hand side of your screen. If you're on a laptop or computer, it may have popped up when you joined us. You just have to hit the arrow or little caret to expand it. You'll see your text box. You can send those questions right to me. You can also find it at the lower right-hand part of your screen. There's a box with a question mark and Q&A. And then if you're on a smartphone or tablet, poke or touch your screen. That'll bring up your control panel. You might have to click that button with 3 dots to access your Q&A. So we hope you participate, and we'll try to get all your questions answered. So I'd like to thank the sponsors of our program, which is my Department of Senior Services, Blue Cross of Western New York, Excelsior Orthopedics, and Wegmans for everything they do for our program. And as always, we at Senior Services are here for you. If you have any questions about programs, services, or benefits, even if you're not sure what you need, please start with us and we'll do our best to help you out. We're 858-8526. Now I'll introduce the star of the show. Joe Fiegl is Deputy Commissioner for Erie County's Division of Sewer Management, which is responsible for the 7 Erie County sewer districts. Prior to joining for Erie County, Joe worked in engineering consulting. He is a licensed professional engineer in New York State, a board-certified environmental engineer, and a graduate of Northwestern University. And we're happy to have him here. Joe, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Katie. And really, my sincere thanks to all of you for signing up for this University Express course. As Katie said, my name is Joe Fiegl, and I'm Erie County's Deputy Commissioner for Sewerage Management. As she also said, my job and responsibilities oversee the 7 county sewer districts. I hope this presentation will bring a smile to your face and introduce you to the wonderful world of sewers. To start off the presentation, I'd like to ask 2 rhetorical questions. The first is, what or who is a polluter? If we were in person, I'd ask folks to raise their hands and offer suggestions, but for now, just think about that for a second. The second rhetorical question I'd like to ask is, what comes to mind when you think of sewers? Again, please think about that for a second. We'll come back to both of these questions a little bit later. The title of this presentation is So, What Happens After You Flush? And I would be remiss if I did not get into the glamorous topic of home plumbing. When I give similar presentations at schools, it's at this point where I'll say, all right, kids, I hope your teachers are okay with this. We're going to have a little potty talk. If you signed up for this session, you know what you're getting yourself into. The typical home has a water system that feeds various faucets, toilet tanks, washing machines, dishwashers, and other fixtures. That clean water is used for various purposes, brushing your teeth, washing your hands, mopping the floor, using the toilet, and much, much more. The used water is collected through a drain system. The drain system, shown in black on this figure, is a series of pipes from all the sources that combine together into a single, slightly larger pipe exiting your home. That single pipe is referred to as your house or your sewer lateral, which is shown in the figure exiting in the basement area of the home. How many of you have spent much time thinking about their lateral? If you haven't any problems with it, probably most have never done so at all. The lateral in most municipalities is private, meaning that it's owned by the homeowner, and that's because it services a single residence. In modern days, that sewer lateral is typically either connected to a private septic system, or for most of us, a public sewer system. That is in today's world. But before I go any further, I'd like to go back 166 years. In 1854, London had a very infamous cholera epidemic that forever changed the course of health and science. At the time, experts were not certain of the cause of the cholera outbreak in the city. Due to the stench in the area, it was theorized that by some that the disease was airborne. It was not until Dr. John Snow meticulously traced the cases of cholera and observed certain patterns using his information gathering and mapping techniques that the epidemic was better understood. Dr. Snow had figured out there was a tie with human waste and drinking water sources. The famous removal of the handle to the Broad Street pump, still memorialized in London today, was a major way of fighting against the epidemic and is often cited as the start of the sanitary revolution. Many consider Dr. John Snow the father of epidemiology, and anyone that's been paying attention to the COVID-19 pandemic has probably heard the term epidemiology used over and over for tracing disease and how it has been spread. Cholera epidemics were not isolated to London. The image on the left of this slide is an accounting of the causes of death in Buffalo, New York in September of 1852. At that time, the city only had a population of around 70 to 75,000 people. In a one-month time, cholera had accounted for 522 deaths in the city. And that does not include other diseases that are typically waterborne, such as dysentery and typhoid fevers, or those classified as unknown. The 520 deaths equates to approximately 0.7% of the population dying of a single disease in a single month. In today's numbers, that would be over 6,400 people dying of the disease in Erie County in a 30-day period. To provide some context, and please do not think I'm minimizing the tragic circumstances we face in our current pandemic. In the first 9 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, Erie County has lost on average 0.01% of its population per month. Unfortunately, that rate has been rising in recent weeks. But comparing to the cholera epidemic, that is a difference of a factor of 70, so from 0.7 to 0.01%. That shows how devastating the cholera epidemic in Buffalo was in 1852. This is all because societies have grown and we were living in closer quarters. With these large concentrations of population, proper protections from pollution associated with human wastes had not yet been enacted. But getting back to that private lateral, with advances in understanding of disease, in the late 1800s, it was determined the waste from homes needed to be redirected away from water supplies. That was the start of sewer systems, a network of pipes that collects the flows from individual properties and takes them to another location. In the early days of sewers, oftentimes those collected flows were sent directly to streams and rivers, as you can see in the figure on this slide from Harper's New Monthly magazine from 1879. Water supply locations were strategically selected to be away from these discharge points, the best they could. It was a common thought that dilution could be the solution to pollution. But dilution only went so far. As populations grew, the concentrations were such that waterways were highly impacted. In the early 1900s, the city of Buffalo was cited as the main source of intestinal disease in both the United States and Canada downstream of the city, along the Niagara River and heading towards Lake Ontario. In 1907, the city of Niagara Falls had the highest death toll of typhoid fever in the world, which was attributed primarily to the growth of the city of Buffalo. Think about that. It wasn't a third world city or anything like that. It was Niagara Falls, just down the street from us. And that was in the 20th century. It's pretty incredible to think about. There were disputes because of these impacts. Can you blame people? It got to the point where King Edward VII of England, representing Canada, and President Howard Taft, representing the United States, signed a boundary waters treaty, excuse me, that's easy for me to say, to address these types of issues. The result was the formation of an international joint commission to study and enact policies regarding these shared waters. The commission is actually still in place today. One of the main advancements locally to improve the shared waters was the formation of the Buffalo Sewer Authority to capture those direct discharges to waterways and provide a basic level of treatment. The primary focus was disinfection. In the 1930s, the Buffalo Sewer Authority implemented what was at the time the largest wastewater chlorination system in the world at their newly constructed Bird Island wastewater treatment plant. As noted in the Courier Express article on the slide from 1939, 1 year after the Buffalo Sewer Authority's Bird Island wastewater treatment plant went online, bacteria levels decreased by 97% in the Niagara River. Dilution as the solution to pollution, I mentioned that earlier, and while it's catchy, it was not effective environmentally either. This photo was in Time magazine in July of 1969 because the Cuyahoga River located in Cleveland started on fire. Amazingly, this was not the first fire or even the worst on the Cuyahoga River, which per the Washington Post had ignited 12 times before. In fact, flare-ups were so common that the 1969 fire barely even made headlines in the local papers. The picture in Time magazine was actually an archived image of a much larger fire from 17 years prior. Think about that for a second. For decades, it was common for a local waterway to ignite. To give more context on the condition of the river at the time, Time magazine had noted that the Cuyahoga River was so saturated with sewage and industrial waste that it oozes rather than it flows. Not a pretty picture at all. The Cuyahoga River was not the only water body to catch fire. Although less publicized, the Buffalo River, right here locally, also caught fire in 1968. There was so much oil and grease on the river that a worker accidentally ignited that blaze with a workman's torch. This wasn't a brazen act of vandalism or anything intentional. It was simply the conditions were so awful that a normal activity could cause the fire. That same year, the Federal Water Pollution Control Administration described the Buffalo River as a repulsive holding basin for industrial and municipal wastes that was devoid of oxygen and almost sterile. That meant there was no aquatic life whatsoever in the river. Oops, sorry about that. Got a little bit ahead of myself. This reputation started to become more publicized a few years earlier when President Johnson visited Buffalo in 1966. At the meeting, President Johnson was presented a bucket of sediment and water from the Buffalo River and was given a big spoon to stir it with. Can you imagine that being done with a president in today's age? When that occurred, Mrs. Johnson, who was also at the meeting, recoiled from the smell, and the president was disgusted. LBJ's response was fairly simple. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. The same year, Senator Robert Kennedy toured the Buffalo River and was quoted as saying, "This is as bad as anything I've seen." Of course, the Buffalo River connects near the terminus of Lake Erie, and poor Lake Erie. In the 1960s, several national publications declared Lake Erie dead due to the toxic algal blooms that had depleted oxygen and would not allow fish to survive. It was so bad that when Dr. Seuss wrote the Lorax in 1971, of all things he could have chosen as an environmental problem, he used Lake Erie as an example. I'll just read a quick quote from the book. "You're glumping the pond where the humming fish hummed. No more can they hum, for their gills are all gummed. I'm sending them off, or their future is dreary. They'll walk on their fins and get woefully weary. In search of some water that isn't so smeary, I hear things are just as bad up in Lake Erie." So with that pleasant thought, let's take a break for a minute and do a quick round of Jeopardy. Feel free to call out at home. I won't force you to answer in the form of a question. So we have the IT guy, published first. I'm going to go with water bodies for 200. Our local county is named after this water body. Okay, I'm guessing a few of you hopefully remembered the name of the department I work for, also who Katie works for. Next up, we'll go with water bodies for 400. This water body is where the city of Buffalo and other portions of our area receives its drinking water from. Okay. I'm guessing a few of you may have gotten this right. I guess I'll go with water bodies for 600. This water body was so important to business and commerce that major canals in the United States and Canada were connected to it. Let me see, Welland Canal, Erie Canal. I think I'm starting to notice a pattern. How about water bodies for 800? Emmengold and Woodlawn Beach State Parks are located on this water body. Hopefully you all have gone to the beach at some point in your lives locally. Let's close out the category for water bodies for 1,000. Chris Hoover of Fishing League Worldwide stated this water body was the #1 smallmouth bass fishery destination in the United States. So even if you do not know Chris Hoover or Fishing League Worldwide, hopefully you can answer this one based on the previous answers. Lake Erie. Our county is named after it. It is our drinking source. It is critical to commerce and economic development. It is used for beaches and recreation. It is a world-class fishery. It's truly amazing in the 1960s and before that we allowed this tremendous asset to deteriorate into such sad shape. By the mid-1960s, momentum had been swinging to address these problems. During President Johnson's previous referenced visit to Buffalo, he committed to a quick and decisive action to save the Great Lakes. During a rally in Niagara Square that day, he was quoted as saying, "Lake Erie must be saved. This great inland sea will sparkle again." The decisive action came after LBJ's presidency with the passage of the Clean Water Act. Quoting portions of the act directly, the Clean Water Act's stated goals were to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters, that the discharge of pollutants into navigable waters be eliminated, to foster the protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife to provide for recreation, to prohibit the discharge of pollutants in toxic amounts, provide financial assistance to construct publicly owned waste treatment works, that was a key one, to develop and implement area-wide treatment management planning processes, to initiate major research and demonstration, and develop programs for the control of non-point sources of pollution. In short, the Clean Water Act provided standards that needed to be met, money necessary to implement infrastructure to meet those standards, and research activities to bring about technological advances. The Clean Water Act noted specifically that it would provide financial assistance to construct publicly owned waste treatment works, or POTWs. A more common term used for these facilities that were built or the existing facilities that were upgraded was wastewater treatment plants. Wastewater treatment plants are pollutant discharge elimination systems. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or New York State DEC, issues state pollutant discharge elimination system permits to these facilities. And the permits are limitations that the facility must meet. Those limitations are determined by the New York State DEC, so the facility protects the designated uses of the water body it is discharging to. So, for example, you do not want treated effluent from a wastewater treatment plant that is too acidic or too basic. Therefore, pH is monitored and must maintain between certain parameters, typically a pH of 6 to 9. As another example, phosphorus was a key item included in many permits, particularly for those discharging to the Great Lakes, because it was determined that phosphorus was the main culprit to the toxic algal blooms that had plagued Lake Erie for decades. Numerous items are tested and monitored at these facilities. Simply put, these plants eliminate pollutants they receive. The permits enforce the Clean Water Act standards and are what facilities use to govern their operation. What does it take to eliminate the pollution? In short, it is a complicated step-by-step process. Each system or facility is a little bit different, so for the purposes of this presentation, I will provide a general or typical example of how these processes work. Some people may ask, what is in sewage? Well, here is a partial list. Primarily, there is water, and that is what we attempt to recover from this waste stream. Is the other stuff, waste from people, detergents and soaps, toothpaste, dirt, toilet paper, oils and greases, food waste, bacteria, industrial byproducts. Those are the items that could potentially harm our waterways and what is removed or eliminated through the process. So what happens after you flush? First, that used water coming from the private laterals is collected through a sewer system. In most municipalities, there are two types of sewer systems in the road. One is referred to as the storm sewer system, which collects stormwater from the streets and other areas and conveys it to waterways. The second is the sanitary sewer system, which is what your home's private lateral connects to and separately sends the collected sewage or wastewater to the treatment plant. There is one difference in Erie County. Within the city of Buffalo, there is what is referred to as a combined sewer system. What that means is the same sewers handle both storm and sanitary services. The sewage within these sanitary sewer pipes generally flows by gravity. What that means is the pipe is gently sloped downward with the sewage flowing from the higher point to a lower point. To provide access to the gravity sewer system, there are manholes. As these pipes combine with pipes from other areas, the sewers become bigger and bigger. What I'm going to show you now is video footage from televising work we perform in the sewer systems. Yes, we do send video cameras into sewers. In fact, these cameras can cost over $100,000. We have a crew that is on the road almost every day performing televising work to assess the condition of our sewers, see if there's any problems, and more. There's not anything remarkable about this particular sewer section. It is 10 inches in diameter, and it's vitrified clay tile sewer, a pipe material that is hardly used anymore. I believe the sewer is approximately 70 years old. So our camera's on a crawler system that allows us to go through the pipe. You can see it can tilt and look up into various items to see if there's any defects. Right here, what the operator of the camera is doing is looking at a house lateral connection. You'll see on the screen that the operator had stated that it was a tap break-in active at 10 o'clock. From here, you'll see that they'll be observing the condition of the pipe. This pipe is actually in pretty decent shape. You'll see on there that at that one joint, there were some roots. That was a pretty minor and not anything that we would necessarily red flag as we're looking at the sewer system. Here, the operator is looking into what is referred to as a factory tap, which means that the tap was installed when the entire sewer was put forth. You can see that it was capped, meaning that it's not active. If that cap was leaking, we would go back in and repair that so that we didn't have that extraneous water coming in. Here's footage of another capped tap. So again, the operator will note that on the screen, and then we have a printout of all the findings along with the video that our engineers will review to see if there's any sort of repairs that need to be performed. You can see here is another break-in tap. This is, again, what we will document the condition of, and if there's any sort of problems here, we may come back and perform some sort of fix. One of the reasons I mentioned earlier that the vitrified clay tile pipes are not typically used anymore is because there's a joint roughly every 3 feet, and at joints are spots where there's potential issues where you could have infiltration and inflow coming in, where roots can enter, and things like that. As we go along, we'd see if there's any sort of cracks, collapses, if there's grease buildup, or any sort of defects with the line. Although the goal is to have everything flow by gravity, the natural terrain, creeks, and other geographical features sometimes makes gravity flow infeasible. In those instances, the most common way to address it is by installation of a pumping station. Think of a gas pump. There's a tank in the ground and a mechanical system to raise the gasoline to a higher level. Wastewater pumping stations also have tanks in the ground with pumps connected to move the sewage to either a higher level or another location. Unlike the gas pump, sometimes the discharge location can be several miles away. The Erie County Sewer Districts are responsible for approximately 100 wastewater pumping stations scattered throughout our area. These facilities range in size from those that can pump relatively small amounts, say 20 to 30 gallons per minute, to those that can pump millions and millions of gallons per day. The following is a photo of our Boston Valley pumping station, located on Route 391. You probably notice a small building, a gray piece of equipment next to it, an antenna, some yellow bollards, a paved area, and some fencing. Does not look like a whole lot is happening here. This picture is from the construction of the facility a few years ago. As you can see, an enormous hole needed to be dug and quite deep, roughly 30 feet. The main structure constructed here was the wet well for the pumping station. The wet well receives the sewage and, in this type of pump station, also houses the submersible pumps inside. 3 pumps are installed, 2 of which are needed to handle the peak flows, and the third is there for redundancy in case there are problems. Here's another view of the wet well. The peak flows The peak flow from two of these pumps operating is approximately 4.6 million gallons per day, or roughly 3,200 gallons per minute. To put that in perspective, this station could empty an Olympic-sized swimming pool in less than 3.5 hours. This is not even close to the largest pumping station the county owns, operates, and maintains. A few other points. The antenna in the photo is part of the county's telemetry system, which allows communication between the station and our 24/7 control room so that this facility, along with other remote pumping stations, are continuously monitored. That large gray item is the backup generator for the pumping station. This facility must function under all conditions, and therefore, if there is a power outage, there needs to be a backup. There are serious problems if any of these facilities cannot function. We go to great lengths to make sure service is maintained. In fact, one of the most challenging aspects of this construction project was this was a pumping station replacement, meaning wastewater service needed to continue despite the significant construction work occurring at the site. For those that may be asking, the total cost for construction of this pumping station was almost $3 million. Once the flow makes it through the sewers and pumping stations and enters the treatment plant site, the first step is what was referred to as preliminary treatment. Preliminary treatment removes large debris up front to protect the equipment within the wastewater plant. Start a video here. This video provides a schematic of the most common preliminary treatment device, a screen. A typical screen configuration includes a series of thin metal bars placed in the flow stream where larger debris get caught. As the screen could be clogged, there's a scraper or rake mechanism that removes the debris from the screen so that there is no backup. You can see slowly on that the blue rake is raising up, bringing that black debris to a higher level. The debris is typically conveyed into some sort of hopper or compactor, which afterward is disposed of in a dumpster. You would be amazed at some of the things that are found in a sewer system. There was one time we had a backup in our system and found a bowling ball lodged in the pipe. That's right, that picture there is of the bowling ball we recovered from the sewer system. Could you imagine getting that down the drain? In all seriousness, we're fairly certain someone illegally opened a manhole and threw it down there. Why? I don't have a glimmer. Sometimes you just can't explain things. At the bar screens, there have been all sorts of strange items caught on them. The most recent thing found of interest was what looked to be a fairly new $100 bill. Can you see it there next to the other debris? Not sure what ended up happening with that $100 bill. After preliminary treatment, the next stage in the process is what's referred to as primary treatment. There are two main functions of primary treatment: to have solids sink to the bottom and to have oils, greases, and other floatables rise to the top. The solids that sink to the bottom, referred to as sludge, and sludge looks like it sounds, is disposed of through other processes in the plant. Similarly, the oils, greases, and other floatables, also referred to as scum, we have some very fun terms in the wastewater business. The scum is skimmed off the top and also disposed of. The typical means to conduct primary treatment is with equipment referred to as clarifiers. They are essentially large tanks, some circular, some rectangular. On the surface, it does not appear that there is much going on. However, there is a significant amount of equipment in place to optimize treatment. For simplicity's sake, I will focus on circular style clarifiers. Influent sewage enters in a center well. The flow disperses from the center, which you can see from the arrow shown on the figure. The tanks are sized for the expected peak flows and the expected makeup of the sewage to promote settling of the solids. On the bottom is a scraper mechanism to collect the sludge. At the top is a baffle that keeps the floatable materials in, with a skimmer arm to collect those floatables. The sludge and scum are disposed of, and the rest of the effluent goes on to the next step. Before the Clean Water Act, many treatment plants consisted of primary and preliminary treatment, sometimes followed by disinfection. The Clean Water Act brought forth widespread integration of what is referred to as secondary treatment. There are a few types of secondary treatment processes, but for this presentation, I will discuss the most widespread, the activated sludge process. Much of what is done at treatment plants is taking what happens in nature and speeding it up. There are bacteria and other microorganisms in nature that, quote unquote, eat organic materials, nutrients, and solids over time. Many of these microorganisms are present in sewage. In the activated sludge process, we create environments ideal for these microorganisms to consume those materials so that they may ultimately be removed from the sewage. One of the ways is by mixing and aerating the waste stream and engineering the facilities such that optimal pollutant removals can occur. The following two videos are from under the microscope using 1,000 times magnification. These videos were taken at the county's certified laboratory for wastewater testing. So the first video is of raw sewage. In the video, you can see various microorganisms moving freely throughout the liquid. They're relatively well dispersed and not very concentrated. And I just started up the second video. In the second video, you can see the conditions in the secondary treatment system. Because we have promoted ideal conditions with aeration, mixing, and returning activated sludge to the system, you note a much higher concentration of microorganisms. These microorganisms are metabolizing and consuming solids, organics, nutrients, and other microorganisms, and more in these conditions, and much quicker than in nature. Many microorganisms accumulate together in what is referred to as floc in our industry, FLOC. The development of floc has the added benefit of promoting settling in subsequent treatment steps. So what are some of the examples of pollutant removal? I'll ask all of you to remember back to high school chemistry class. Do you recall what this nasty looking molecule is? Well, it is not nasty. It is glucose, or common sugar. Think about a glass of water. If you pour some sugar into it and stir it around, what happens? Well, it dissolves, and you do not see the sugar anymore. However, just because you cannot see it doesn't mean it isn't there, as evidenced by the taste when you drink that same glass of water with the sugar in it. There are plenty of dissolved components in wastewater that need to be removed. In the example of sugar, or glucose, it is a fairly simple reaction promoted by the microorganisms in the secondary treatment process. Again, harkening back to high school chemistry, glucose has the molecular formula of C6H12O6. As I noted earlier, this example of a secondary treatment process includes aeration to make sure there are proper levels of oxygen, or O2, in the environment. The microorganisms break down glucose into CO2, which is carbon dioxide, and H2O, which is water. Just like we humans breathe in oxygen, use it for bodily functions, and exhale carbon dioxide, microorganisms promote similar reactions in this process. There are thousands and thousands of these types of reactions in the secondary treatment process that eliminate pollutants and produce a cleaner water. After aeration and mixing have stirred up the processed liquids, the next step is another stage of clarifiers to remove solids, or the sludge, remove the floatables, or the scum, and allow for cleaner water to proceed to additional treatment. The setup is very similar to the clarifiers described earlier. Tanks are sized for expected peak flows and expected makeup of the sewage. At the top is a baffle to keep the floatable material in with a skimmer on, and at the bottom is a scraper mechanism to collect the sludge. In some clarifiers, chemicals will be added to assist the settling of the sludge or removal of additional pollutants. This video shows the top of a secondary clarifier. The circular metal plate, referred to as a baffle, extends a few inches into the water and keeps the floatable materials in the center. You can see the skimming mechanism slowly rotating clockwise, collecting the scum. Below the surface, solids are settling, and the sludge is collected as well. You can see the cleaner water overtopping the weirs in the lower right-hand corner of the video. For some facilities, there is an additional polishing step required after the secondary treatment process, referred to as tertiary treatment. Generally, tertiary treatment entails the addition of a filtration step. Similar to a swimming pool, the water is sent through some sort of filter media. So you can see here the water is being introduced at the top. In this process, the small particles will be kept in the filter media itself while the cleaner water flows through. Okay. I'm just going to change the view for a second here. So very similar to a pool filter, periodically you need to backwash a wastewater filter as well. So what you'll see here is at the bottom, the flow will be reversed. You can see the solid particles being moved up to the top, out of the filter media. And then what will occur is that water will then be discharged to another channel, and that filter backwash is sent to the beginning of the treatment plant for treatment. Getting back, so that was tertiary treatment. In the secondary treatment process, the bacteria and other microorganisms were critical with the removal of pollutants. However, as we discussed at length earlier in this presentation, bacteria in high concentrations in our waterways contributed to significant illness. Therefore, the final step in the process is disinfection. The most common disinfection method is chlorination. Again, similar to a swimming pool, chlorine is added to the water to oxidize the bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms. Another disinfection technology used in our industry is ultraviolet, or UV. Have you ever heard the phrase, sunlight is the best disinfectant? There's both a metaphorical and a scientific basis behind that quotation. When on the Supreme Court, Justice Brandeis used this phrase to highlight how publicity and transparency can combat corruption. In nature, sunlight is indeed very effective at killing bacteria and viruses. UV disinfection system equipment produces certain wavelengths in the UV spectrum and shines that light into the effluent. The UV light alters the DNA of the microbes, and by altering the DNA, the microbes cannot reproduce. Therefore, the colony dies off. The final step is discharge to our natural environment. We no longer call this wastewater. Instead, we refer to it as treated effluent. This treated effluent has been cleaned to meet stringent standards to be protective of the designated uses of the water body. In this instance, Lake Erie is used for drinking water source, for fishing and recreation, and more. Wastewater treatment plants are actually being rebranded. Did you know that the sewer business needed to be branded in the first place? The new terminology being used is water resource recovery facilities. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. These plants receive the sewage, and what they do is recover clean water so that it may be returned to the environment. Water is a precious and finite resource, and hence should not be quote-unquote wasted. Therefore, these are water resource recovery facilities. That being said, despite my best efforts, my friends still refer to them as poop plants. These images provide a visual contrast between the raw influent sewage on the left and the treated effluent on the right. As we discussed earlier, there's a lot that you cannot see: the removal of dissolved components, bacteria, and more. That also differentiates the true waters. Nevertheless, a fairly striking difference, right? The image in the center is a summary of all the testing requirements at one of our wastewater treatment plants, water resource recovery facilities. The county has its own certified laboratory that performs numerous tests to ensure the process is performing well and to standards. There's even sampling and testing equipment that monitors certain parameters on almost a minute-by-minute basis. The image in the center is certainly not meant to be read, but it illustrates how highly regulated and monitored the process is. One item I did not cover is what happens to the solids or sludge collected at the bottom of the clarifiers. Well, there's a whole other process to handle the solids for proper disposal. A big part of this is removing water from that solid stream. Again, these are water resource recovery facilities. But on a practical basis, whether the final disposal is land application, incineration, composting, or landfill, the more water in the material is being disposed, the more expensive it is. One interesting aspect of the solids process is that you can actually generate energy. So how so? Well, certain facilities have tanks that are referred to as anaerobic digesters. The digesters are designed to maintain temperatures between 95 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, be completely mixed, and have no oxygen. Very similar to the human digestion system. Also similar to the human digestion system, solids are broken down, and one of the byproducts is gas. Methane, to be precise. Some facilities can burn that methane to heat their boiler systems or to even power an engine to produce electricity. There are facilities that have started to accept food wastes and other organics to feed into their digesters and produce more energy. Even some farms use this technology to manage manure. Water resource recovery facilities are named as such because clean water is recovered from the sewage. But the example of anaerobic digesters demonstrates there are other resources that can be recovered. There's a lot of emerging research on how these facilities can transform into utilities of the future to continue protecting waterways, but also manage the entire process to maximize community benefit. Reduction of energy, capturing nutrients, reducing electrical loads, utilizing treated effluent for other purposes, etc., are all ways sewer utilities are working to do more at and with these facilities. Now that you've heard about the history, the process, and how everything works, I'd like to go back to the beginning of this presentation where I asked what or who is a polluter. When I asked that question, did any of you think of industries or these types of discharges? What about Cousin Eddie from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation movie, unloading his RV tank into the storm sewer? Please don't do that. What about the sewer industry? Typically, people think about the sewer industry as being dirty. How about these two? Is that what you thought about as a polluter? The point of this slide is that all of us, children, teenagers, adults, we all utilize water for various purposes, and the used water that goes down the drain is pollution. That doesn't make us dirty. In fact, it's a big part of keeping all of us clean. But we need to understand our role in dealing with that pollution. So what are our responsibilities as polluters? First, we need to make sure that we responsibly pollute. One major challenge sewer service providers face is when people put things down the drain or into the toilet that they should not. For example, only the 3 Ps, poop, pee, toilet paper, should be flushed down the toilet. Why? Well, as we explained, there's sewer pipes, pumps, and other equipment, and those are not designed to pass many of these other items, such as wipes, paper towels, and other similar cleaning products. What often results is something like this, where a pump becomes clogged with those materials. That requires our employees to immediately respond to unclog the equipment or perform repairs, because we don't want backups to impact our customers. Sometimes it's on a nice sunny day, Thursday afternoon right after lunch. Other times it is Sunday at 2 o'clock in the morning during a driving rainstorm, or on Thanksgiving Day. This video provides a demonstration of the problems with flushing items other than the 3 Ps. Okay, so you see a toilet paper and a flushable wipe. It's almost happy hour, right? Although I'm not sure that's what everyone had in mind. So you can see that, oh, I paused it a little late, but you can see that in the video that the toilet paper with some gentle agitation breaks up fairly easily because it's designed to. The wipe, on the other hand, does not, and you will see the results. So if you are not concerned with the public sewer system and the poor sewer worker responding at 2 o'clock in the morning, remember these items can also clog your internal plumbing or your lateral. This could cause a couple $100s in plumbing bills depending on the severity. So if it is not toilet paper, please, please, please put it in the trash. Fats, oils, and greases, or fog, are also an issue. If you've been paying attention, you may be saying, but Joe, I saw clarifiers that treatment plants are designed to remove these types of items. And that is correct. However, the fats, oils, and greases that make their way to the treatment plant are supposed to be oils from your skin, perhaps small amounts left on a plate that you cannot wipe off, those type of things. That does not mean the grease left over from cooking bacon. or used vegetable oil or similar items should be put down the drain. Why? Well, when those items are hot, they may flow, but as they cool, these items solidify. This is what can happen. At one of our pumping stations, someone had to literally shovel out solidified grease. So what should you do instead? Wipe off dishes with a napkin or paper towel if that works. Otherwise, pour used oil or grease into a can or a jar and let it cool. And then you could subsequently throw it out. Running hot water and putting it down the drain is not proper. In fact, it can clog your pipes as well, causing problems at your house. Pharmaceuticals are also something to be mindful of properly disposing. Many are concerned about these items getting into other people's hands, particularly for safety around the home and because, unfortunately, certain types of medications are misused. Unused medications should be disposed of at various drop-off locations. There are dozens of them in our county. The reason is that the treatment plants or water resource recovery facilities are not designed to remove are only designed to remove certain pollutants, but others they are not. There are thousands and thousands of pharmaceuticals, and while some are removed at these facilities, others pass right through. That means certain compounds can make their way into the environment, which could cause problems to aquatic life if in high enough concentration. The final polluter responsibility I'd like to highlight is that we have to fund sewer services. I spoke of the pipes, pumping stations, treatment plants, and more. All of this infrastructure is extremely costly to install. It's extremely costly to operate and maintain, and it must be operated and maintained by professionals to ensure that the infrastructure is reliable and functions properly. This is a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no holidays off essential business. It is one that needs proper funding to ensure the essential services are provided. On the screen here, I have the annual average cost for a typical family home for cable and internet, cell phone, electric, gas, and at the bottom there is the sanitary sewer bill. If you ask someone if they could live without their cell phone or their internet service, many would say that that is a necessity in today's world. You can see by this chart that people are certainly willing to pay for it. Clean water is not often seen as a necessity, unfortunately. That is a perfect segue to the second question I posed when we started this presentation. What comes to mind when you think of sewers? Has your answer changed since the beginning? I'm hoping one item that comes to mind is the protection of public health. A few years ago, the British Medical Journal polled its readers and asked what was the greatest medical achievement of the last 150 years. Proper sanitation was selected, surpassing all other medical advances, including anesthesia, antibiotics, the discovery of DNA, and vaccines. Can you imagine a surgery without anesthesia? What about the importance of antibiotics for vaccines? Despite those type of impacts, sanitation was chosen as the greatest medical achievement of the last 150 years. The reason why sanitation was selected is if you look at the life expectancy of humans before advances in sanitation, the average lifespan was around 40 years. From the late 1800s into the 1900s, life expectancy increased roughly 50% to over 60 years, in large part due to the implementation of modern sanitation. Sewer services were critical to that advancement. Besides the critical role in protecting public health, I hope you all will also think about protecting the environment when thinking of sewers. In the early to mid 20th century, our waterways were in deplorable condition. In the last 50 plus years, we have seen tremendous advances. No longer is the Buffalo River devoid of life and ready to start on fire. Now it's an area that people gravitate towards to have fun, for recreation, and more. Now, but by no means are our waterways perfect. I hope that is not a takeaway. There are still problems, and hence there's still work to do. But we must acknowledge how far we have come and that the investments put forth have made meaningful improvements. Did you think of making Erie County greater when you answered the question earlier? This right here is the oldest report in our division's library, and it's titled Progressive Sewer Systems for a Greater Erie County. Before there was an Erie County legislature, the county was governed by a board of supervisors. After World War II, the board of supervisors saw the uncoordinated, uneconomical, and unsatisfactory manner in which sewer services were being handled as a major problem, and one of which would limit our area if not addressed. This business is not glamorous, but it is important. What resulted was the formation of the Erie County Sewer Districts a few years later. So what happens after you flush? In short, a lot. I hope you gained a better knowledge and appreciation for the wonderful world of sewers and water resource recovery. Thank you.
Joe, thank you so much. I know I definitely have a greater appreciation for everything that goes on. Holy cow. We have a lot of questions here, if that's okay, if we get started.
That's awesome. Yeah, please. Let me just get a drink of water.
Okay. I don't want to say this might be a record, but close. All right. So first question. Am I correct that most municipalities in the county have their own sewer system and plants?
There's a mixture. The county handles, I would say roughly about, I'd say probably about half of the county. But there are local municipalities that do handle their own sewer services. So for example, the city of Buffalo, the Buffalo Sewer Authority handles sewer services in that area. The town of Amherst does. The town of Tonawanda does. The town of Grand Island does. Portions of the town of Cheektowaga are handled by the town, but portions are also handled by the county. Same with the town of West Seneca. Most of the other areas, there's some small municipalities here or there, but most of the other areas are handled by the Erie County Sewer Districts.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Next question is, how many of the municipal plants have combined sewer overflow systems? I know the city of Buffalo does, like you had mentioned.
Yep. So the city of Buffalo, at least in Erie County, and the Buffalo Sewer Authority is the only combined sewer system. The rest of the county is what referred to as separate sanitary sewers. That being said, it does not mean that they're not impacted by wet weather. So there's what's referred to as infiltration and inflow, which is extraneous flows that makes their way either by groundwater or by rainwater that makes its way into the separate system, and that can cause problems. But the only true combined sewer system in Erie County is the city of Buffalo.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Next, has there been any attempt to measure COVID virus levels in wastewater?
Actually, we have partnered with the University of Buffalo, and we have been sampling at I think it's the 7 largest treatment plants in Erie County, along with 3 locations near the University of Buffalo's North Campus. And what we've been doing is we've been sampling twice a week and then sending those samples to the University of Buffalo to test for the RNA of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And what we're hoping to do with that information is to use that as a predictive tool. So typically what will happen is the virus will show up in higher concentrations in wastewater before hospitalizations start to rise. In fact, there's some information out there, and this is a really emerging science. There's some information that says up to a week before you'll start to see the spike in the wastewater. The one challenge that we have had locally is the testing kits that University of Buffalo needs to utilize have been in extremely short supply. Just recently, and actually I got an email about this earlier this week, the University of Buffalo was able to get through the supply side issues with regard to that. And so we've had all the samples properly preserved, and they're going through that backlog of samples. And actually with Dr. Burstein's office and my office, we're having a meeting with the University of Buffalo next week to hopefully go over some of the data that we're receiving.
Wow, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, this is, like I said, it's an emerging area that a lot of municipalities are looking into to see if it can indeed be a predictive tool.
Wow. So I guess more on that to come.
Yeah.
Next question I'm seeing is, if they notice an issue with the private lateral on the video, do they notify the homeowner?
It depends on the issue. So it depends, and that can get very complicated. if we notice, for example, that it's completely blocked off or things like that, then yes, we will notify them. The issues typically at those connections is when we go through and we rehabilitate it, we want to make sure that we provide them a proper connection at that time. If we think that it's going to collapse, we want to let the folks know, because obviously then they're going to have a backup into their home or whatever the case may be. But I'm not going to say that that's something that is very common, but I'm also not going to say that's unheard of.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Sorry, it's rapid fire here. We just have a lot of questions.
No, I welcome the questions. I love talking about this stuff.
Okay. Next is, what is being done about farming runoff that is causing the algae blooms? Yeah, so that's an excellent question. The one slide I had, go back a little bit. I didn't really touch on it very much. Right here is a slide that shows various sources of phosphorus into Lake Erie, and you can see that the light blue at the bottom is phosphorus levels coming from direct point sources. And what a point source is basically wastewater treatment plants. And you can see that level has gone down significantly. The biggest area of phosphorus loading now into Lake Erie is from agricultural runoff. And so that is not something that necessarily, I'm responsible for in my job, but it's something I'm very aware of, just because, I'm an environmental engineer, and these are the things that I'm concerned with. I know that there is a lot of work being done with concentrated animal feeding operations to I think there's regulations that the New York State had put out to try to handle runoff from those locations. There's best management practices that the soil, water, and conservation districts are working with farmers on. And I know that there's also, I don't know if it's in New York State, but I know in Ohio in particular, because a lot of the loadings are coming from the large farms in the Midwest, that they're really looking at that quite closely. Because as I mentioned, we've made tremendous advances, but if folks remember, there was a toxic algal bloom in Toledo that shut down their water supply, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And the main source that was identified, at that time was agricultural runoff. So that is a really important thing that needs to be addressed. And as you can see, various sources have gone down over time, but not necessarily that phosphorus source. Thanks, Joe. Next question. How is the Sewage Creek doing? Is overflow still flowing into the creek?
Yeah, so that is, I believe that yes, there are still overflows that are going into that creek. It's not something that our Erie County sewer districts are associated with, but again, being in the industry, I kind of know about what's going on there. The Buffalo Sewer Authority has what's referred to as a long-term control plan. I mentioned that they have a combined sewer system, which means that the storm water and the sanitary water mixes together. And in most days, and even during small rainstorms, all of that water makes its way to the Bird Island wastewater treatment plant. But you can imagine when there's a large rainstorm or if there's a lot of snow melt designed into the system. And again, these are systems that were started being constructed in the late 1800s and early 1900s. They're what referred to as combined sewer overflow points. The Buffalo Sewer Authority was required to come up with what's referred to, as I mentioned, a long-term control plan to mitigate those discharges. And I know that Sewage Creek was a major item that was targeted there. They've actually have some really cool technologies they're working on. One, our population has actually gone down since when the lattice infrastructure was constructed. And so they actually have increased capacity in certain pipes. So what they're doing is they're putting in what are referred to as quote unquote smart sewers to hold back some of the flows and store it. And so it doesn't go out some of those overflow points. So that's one component. The other component is there's also some other local towns that have had sanitary sewer overflows that are upstream in Sewage Creek. And I know that the New York State DEC has worked with those local towns, and those local towns have put forth, I think, tens of millions of dollars to try to address those issues. So my understanding, again, it's not something that we're directly involved in, but my understanding is that the problem has not gone away, but it's gotten better.
Okay, thanks, Joe. If I jump ahead quickly, there's another question about that. We have a person wondering
yes,
why the river there smells bad in the summer.
So if it's the Buffalo River, part of the problem with the Buffalo River is that it actually wasn't, naturally, it's not that wide. So for the purposes of servicing the grain elevators along the Buffalo River there, and for the ships that needed to go down there, that waterway was significantly widened, over the course of time. And so what that means is that the flow that goes through there, imagine if you take something that's small and make it much wider, the flow slows down. And so I'm guessing that's part of, and again, this is, not something I'm directly responsible for, but I'm guessing that has some contributions to it. There may be other things at play there, but that's kind of my guess on my basic knowledge of what's going on there.
Okay, thanks, Joe. We still have quite a bit here, and it's after 3 o'clock. Just want to be mindful of your time if we can continue.
I'm certainly willing to stay on.
Okay, thanks. And you answered a lot of questions too, but there's still a lot more. So next one I'm seeing is, was improper backflushing the cause of the backwater coming out of the Niagara Falls treatment plant a couple years ago?
So again, I did see a presentation on this, so it's not something I was directly involved in, but I'll try my best to answer the questions. Niagara Falls treatment plant has a unique system. It actually uses activated carbon as its filtration system. So they're not, I talked a lot about activated sludge, which is that aeration system that we talked about in secondary treatment. The Niagara Falls plant was designed using activated carbon, which is very, very different. It doesn't use aeration, it doesn't use, that type of thing. The issue ends up being that the reason why that system was put in place is because there were so many chemical and industrial customers in the Niagara Falls area that were discharging to that treatment plant. And to provide, again, to be protective of the waterways, they wanted activated carbon in there to remove some of those industrial pollutants. Well, what happened over the course of time is a lot of those industries had closed down. And so what you have now in place is a system that was designed for a large industrial load that is no longer there. And from what I understand, again, this is from a presentation I saw on the topic, again, not my direct involvement, they have issues with that process, and at that time there was some things that happened at the plant that ended up causing that black water discharge. That's, again, my really basic knowledge of what's going on there. So I don't know if it was someone asked if it was improper backflushing. I don't know if they had backflushed their activated carbon filters or whatever. That I don't know. So I don't want to I don't even want to guess on with regard to that. But I at least wanted to provide at least some basic knowledge of what I have on that topic.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Next. Wow, I didn't know flushable wipes are actually not good for pipes. That rhymed. Are all toilet paper the same? For example, recycled toilet paper, is that okay? Thanks.
If it says toilet paper, yes. But those flushable wipes cause real problems. And there's actually a industry called the non-woven, I forget exactly what it's called, but there's a trade industry that has been fighting with the sewer industry about flushable wipes and the labeling of those products and things like that. Dr. Oz, if anyone's interested, Dr. Oz had a segment a few years ago where he went to New York City's one of New York City's wastewater plants and saw the problems that those flushable wipes occurred. And I'll give you a little story. When we were young, my wife, when my kids were younger, my wife had bought some of those flushable wipes when my kids were going through potty training. And I said to her, those cause problems, and she's like, yeah, but they're nicer on the kids and things like that. I'm like, well, and what ended up happening, my wife was good about putting them in the trash. The kids were not. And they ended up flushing them down, and they actually caught in our lateral, and we had to call a plumber to clean them out. So here's the person running the county sewer system, and I'm having problems with flushable wipes. So they are a problem, 100%. But if it says toilet paper, I've not heard anything with regard to recycled versus different types. If it says toilet paper, it's generally designed to break up in the system.
Thanks for sharing that firsthand knowledge with us, Joe.
Hey, you know what? My life's an open book.
Good. Next, I've got a couple comments here. Very well done. I learned a lot.
Good.
I have another Zoom meeting, must leave. Please thank Joe. Very informative, should be required viewing of every citizen. We'll direct them to the University Express website from now on.
Yeah, there we go.
Next question, is there a future for gray water systems for the home?
That is something that a lot of municipalities are looking at, particularly those. So we talked about combined sewer systems. One of the things that Buffalo Sewer Authority is really looking at is green infrastructure. So trying to capture the rainwater and things like that, and either hold it back so it doesn't make it into the storm system, or utilize it for other purposes. So I assume what is meant by the gray water is taking some of that runoff from, say if you capture, in like a rain barrel, whatever the case may be, and maybe utilizing that for solely, instead of using water from the water mains or the potable system, utilizing that water for toilets and things like that isn't meant for drinking. And there are some municipalities that are looking into that. I want to say New York City may have had a pilot on something like that. But we are also talking about gray water. We also, there's some municipalities that are using treated effluent for different purposes. Some are using treated effluent if they have a golf course that's nearby. They'll use that for irrigation. They're in the city of Albany, downstate. Actually, the treated effluent is used for non-contact cooling water for industry. So there's a lot of different purposes that those various waters are being used for. So I hope I answered that question.
I think you did, absolutely. Next, I see Joe, great presentation, very informative. I learned a lot. And the presentation itself was exceptional. Fantastic job. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback, really do.
Next, we have, are you able to detect low levels of radioactivity?
We've actually had a couple instances where, let me take a step back. It's very difficult to detect it in the aqueous state, but we have a few of our water resource recovery facilities. The solids are disposed of at landfills, and landfills have radioactive detectors at them. And we actually had a couple instances where we brought the dewatered sludge to the landfill, and the radioactivity detectors went off. So the first time this happened, we were extremely concerned. We talked to radiological experts. We tried to get some better information on it, and et cetera, et cetera. And what we found out was it was radioactive iodine. And the radioactive iodine had come from medical treatments. So iodine is used as a tracer in certain medical tests. I think it's also used in certain cancer treatments and things like that. So what we do now at two of our locations is, before we send any sort of any of those solids to the landfill, we test the dumpster bin to make sure that it doesn't have any radioactivity associated with it. Now I talk about radioactivity. Light bulbs are radioactivity. There's radioactivity. The sun produces radioactivity. Carbon, the carbon dating. That's a radioactivity that they're looking at. Iodine is, as you said, it's a medical test. So in the concentrations or the dose and the time period that we're talking about, it's not harmful to our employees, our workers, or anything like that. But nevertheless, it's something that we're kind of mindful of.
All right, thanks, Joe. Still have about maybe a little over a handful of things here, if that's okay if we finish up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Next, I have a question relating to my residence. I have a toilet in my basement. While it doesn't happen often, thank goodness, heavy rains have caused the sanitary sewer to back up into my basement toilet, creating a big mess. I'm guessing this shouldn't be happening. Can something be done to correct this?
Yeah, so basement facilities are a real problem. We cannot guarantee service to the basement connections or below grade connections, and the reason why is some of the things that we talked about. You have those flushable wipes, you have greases, we have the bowling ball that I showed. That bowling ball, actually, the way we found it was there was a backup in the sewer system. So we can't, it could be a nice sunny day and someone could empty out their turkey fryer or something like that and can cause a backup into our system. So that's one of the reasons why we can't guarantee service to those basement connections. Now she mentioned that this happens during wet weather, and what I said earlier was we have infiltration inflow that makes its way into the sewer system. What that means is that that some of that rainwater, and it can happen, people connect their gutters to the sanitary system, people connect their sump pumps to the sanitary system, and then we also have, as I mentioned, we televise our pipes. Sometimes we find cracks and joints that leak and things like that. So sometimes that water makes its way into the sewer, and if there's not enough capacity there, then basically you can have those types of breakups. We have a huge program that we work on to try to address those infiltration and inflow sources. Now we do as much as we can on the public side of the equation. So we'll rehabilitate our sewers, we'll rehabilitate our manholes, we'll try to make them as watertight as we can. But then we have the private side, which is the private laterals, and also, as I mentioned, some of those other sources that people have connected into there. We do have a property inspection program where we try to go into people's homes and identify those infiltration inflow sources, but it's a huge challenge. So what we try to tell folks, if they do have those basement facilities, is first, do you really need it? And a lot of people kind of look at it and say, I never used that basement shower, or I never used that basement toilet, and then they plug it up and they can walk away. We also say to folks that there are some plumbing solutions that you can do to protect yourself. And we say, talk with a plumber. You can sometimes put in a valve that will make sure that backflow doesn't happen. If you really like having that toilet, you can actually put in a pumping system to disconnect it from gravity and have it pump into the sewer. So there's some solutions that you can do to kind of help with that situation, but there is inherently some risk associated with having those basement connections, which is why that problem may be occurring.
Well, Joe, thanks so much. That was really good information. I don't have one, thankfully. Next, out west, for example, in the state of Idaho, every town has a publicly available RV dumping facility. Does your system provide for RV dumping facilities?
I don't think we do. I'm trying to think if we've ever had any RVs dumping at our facilities. I don't think we do. And to be frank, I don't know where where those are available locally. I'm going to write that down. I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
But don't do what cousin Eddie did.
Oh, that's the best part. We won't say what he says.
Yes, we won't.
This person is wondering, what are your thoughts on flushable kitty litter?
I haven't seen a lot of it. My concern with flushable kitty litter would be that it produces a lot of grit, and I don't know how well that dissolves. And so there's a couple problems that could happen with that. If you've ever gone underneath your sink, you'll see kind of a P-shaped trap there, right? It's kind of curved and then it goes into the wall. Most homes have a similar type of trap outside on their lateral. So what could happen is if that grit doesn't dissolve very well, that could settle down in the outside trap, which could cause some problems. But I don't, to be honest with you, I don't know a lot about flushable kitty litter. It's not something that we've gotten into, but so I can't really offer up more than that.
That's okay. Thank you. We've had somebody write in, take the RV to Camping World or another camping supply location.
That's the beauty of today's age, right? You get the questions answered. Okay, so take it to RV World. Perfect.
Mm-hmm. And then we have question, septic waste, where does that go when pumped out?
Okay, so septic systems are designed such that the tanks do the treatment themselves. They have the settling. They make sure that the harmful wastes stay in there, and then the effluent goes into typically a leach field, which then makes its way into the ground. If septic systems are spread out well, then there's typically not a lot of problems. But there's been some times where septic systems, installed a long time ago in closer concentration, they found that they were finding that there was some harmful effects that were occurring because, again, in such a high concentration. Again, we talked about earlier, things were okay when humans were spread out, but when we started getting closer together was when we started to see a lot of the disease and things like that. My understanding is that private homeowners are responsible for pumping those out and maintaining those systems and things like that. And that's really good practice because those systems are very expensive. I think they could be upwards of $10,000 to $15,000 to replace. So if you have them regularly maintained, I think you'll get more time out of those systems than if you just let it go for too long. Oh, Kate, I can't hear you.
I was muted. Second time today. Okay. It was good. I said, I promised you we're coming to an end. And this question that came through is something I was wondering if we would have it. What is the best way to unclog your drain?
It depends on the problem. I have one at my house that I am continually battling. I generally like to snake the drains. So what that means, it's kind of a coil. It's a coil that is in a. It's really hard to describe. It's a long coil that has a braided end at it, and you bring it into the system, and you push it in, and then you turn it, and then it makes its way up through a turn, and then you push it a little bit further, and you turn it, and then you can. Generally, what you're seeing there is usually hair and those type of things that are getting clogged in there. Drano and those type of things are of course, those work in certain circumstances. Depends on what's causing the clog. My understanding is those generally are really effective on where you have the problem right near the trap. But if it goes a little bit further in, it might be more of a problem.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Sure, I'm unmuted. All right. So now I'm just seeing a bunch of thank yous. We have thank you for an excellent explanation of things we use every day. We have, this was such an informative presentation. Thank you so very much. We have my new favorite presentation. And then last thing I'm seeing is thank you very much. I worked as a civil engineer designing sewers and roads back in the Netherlands for 40 years. Still, I learned a couple things.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah. So Joe, thank you for your time, for all that you do, keeping things running and flowing for us. And to everyone who's on, we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
All right, I'll connect with you offline, Joe, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care.